So I'm Samuel Ramani. I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Oxford's Department of Politics and International Relations and non-resident fellow at the Gulf International Forum. So Russia's influence in the Persian Gulf has been expanding quite significantly since its military intervention in 2015. You might have seen their strategic partnership with the United Arab Emirates, their close alignment with Iran, as well as their outreaches to Saudi Arabia and the rest of the GCC. So why is this occurring, even though many of these countries, with the exception of Iran, are reliable US partners and allies? Russia's trade and investment linkages lag behind many other great and regional powers, for that matter, in the Gulf region. Its trade and investment targets with Saudi Arabia that it's discussing right now are the same as those that were being discussed in 2015. Its economic partnership with Iran is hobbled by sanctions, and while its investment links to the UAE are growing moderately, they're still by no means enough to really provide a durable foundation for Russia to be a great power. Instead, Russia's power lies due to non-material and non-transactional sources of bonding. In particular, Russia's adept ability to adapt to changes in the international system, its ideational partnerships with countries in the region, as well as its ability to secure cooperation on regional crises. So, since the mid-1980s, the GCC countries and Iran have valued the notion of multipolarity. The UAE and Oman re-established embassy-level diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union in spite of the ongoing war with Afghanistan and their past mistrusts in 1985 and 1986. The Gorbachev-Rafsanjani Summit of 1989 rebooted Soviet-Iranian relations, and the Russians re-established diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia in 1992. And in spite of crises such as Chechnya, Afghanistan, Syria, this broader trend towards the collective non-West has been persistent in the Gulf region, and Russia has been a beneficiary of that. The recent belief in U.S. disengagement, which has included concerns about the Obama administration's vacillations on Syria, the Trump administration's refusal to support Saudi Arabia materially after the Abqaiq drone attack in 2019, and the Biden administration's opposition to offensive military support to the war in Yemen, as well as restrictions on arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, have perpetuated and exacerbated this trend, but it's important to note that the Gulf countries were turning towards Russia and the multipolar world order organically as part of their strategy, and it's not just all because of the United States. Second of all, there are ideational synergies that have been developed between Russia and the Gulf countries. In particular, Russia is bonded with the UAE on political Islam and on authoritarian stability, and that is extended towards Saudi Arabia. So the aversion to the Muslim Brotherhood, the aversion to the Arab Spring. Moreover, Russia and Iran have developed a close ideational partnership based on opposing Western military interventions, such as the Iraq War, and also a close relationship against unilateral sanctions. Moreover, these ideational partnerships have been reinforced by the close relationships between Chechnya, Tatarstan, and Ingushetia, and various Gulf countries, which have reinforced Russia's place within the broader Islamic world. Finally, there's cooperation on regional crises. Russia and Iran in Syria, Russia and the UAE, and Saudi Arabia and Libya, and this augments their ideational and these world order tectonic shifts that are bringing Russia and the Gulf closer together. So Russia differs from the United States in that it maintains close ties with Iran and all 6 GCC countries. And this flexibility is something that's quite notable. Russia can engage with Saudi Arabia and Iran, Israel and Iran, the UAE and Turkey, and both sides of the Gulf dispute that recently ended with the Alula Agreement in January. And this is due to a friends with all, alliances with none approach. Russia tries to maintain flexible diplomacy with everyone, but it does not engage itself in any kind of binding security guarantor commitments to any one side, which means that it doesn't have to take sides in regional disputes. Russia also has a compartmentalized strategy at pitching its ideas and norms to individual countries that creates customized partnerships that have both a unique set of material interests and a unique set of ideas undergirding them. Moreover, Russia tries to present itself as an honest broker in the region, in contrast to the United States, which is seen as being opposed to Iran and too willing to favor the Israeli and Saudi agenda amongst many countries. Its Gulf security plan has tried to create an OSCE-style dialogue format which regulates tensions with Iran, and it resonates with Iran's Hormuz peace initiative as well as some of China's collective security proposals. Its offers to mediate in the Qatar crisis, however unsuccessful, reinforce that view. Russia has tried to be a bridge builder at times between conflicting forces, for example, like putting Haftar and Turkey in the same room in its January 2020 talks on Libya and Moscow, or engaging Qatar in the Syrian process, like we saw during Lavrov's visit to Doha. This reframes and eviscerates some of the negative Soviet-era legacies and mistrusts, which stemmed from actions like the Soviet invasion of Iran in 1946, the Soviet support for South Yemen's involvement in the Dhofar rebellion in Oman, and its support for Arab nationalism against conservative Arab monarchies throughout the Cold War. So Russia is trying to be seen as a stabilizing force and an order builder that appeals to the entire region with customized strategies for each country, and in spite of elite-level disagreements at various moments in time, that narrative appears to be gaining quite a bit of traction, and that can lead to it being more flexible in its engagement with regional powers than the United States. So Russia's security cooperation with the Gulf has been growing quite rapidly, in particular in the sphere of counterterrorism, where Russia and the UAE actually exchange counterterrorism targets in Syria. The Special Operations School, which was constructed in Grozny, has also been a bridge with the Gulf countries on the area of counterinsurgency. Moreover, Russia and Iran also cooperate based on a common definition of terrorism. They both view Hezbollah as something of a national liberation movement, or a movement that fights Sunni terrorism rather than a terrorist movement, which is very different from the views of the United States and most of Europe. Russia also engages with pro-Iranian proxies and militias like Hashd al-Shabi on the fight against ISIS in Iraq. And we also see counterterrorism cooperation extending towards broader security cooperation in regional crises. For example, the UAE funds the Wagner Group private military contractors that back Khalifa Haftar's campaigns in Libya. Russia has provided training to Emirati-backed forces on the use of Pantsir S-1 missile defense systems and Caliber missiles that counteract the Turkish drones. And Syrian mercenaries that were recruited by Russia fight alongside UAE-backed Sudanese and Chadian mercenaries. Russia and Iran also cooperate in Syria, even though in southern Syria, the Iranians are more dominant, and in Idlib, the Russians are more dominant, so they're carving out separate spheres to deal with separate threats. And relationships at the security level are also growing at a personal level, like Patrushev and Sheikh Tahnoun in the UAE, Soleimani and Russian officials before his death in the start of 2020. Arms sales, however, have been harder to follow. The Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act and the experience of Turkey buying the S-400s show just how hard it is for Russia to market arms to the Middle Eastern region without backlash. The UAE, for example, was the fourth largest purchaser of arms in 2000, but now it's a much lower purchaser of arms. The edge and the indigenous defense industries that are being created in the Gulf regions are cooperating on a variety of contexts, like aerospace and fighter jet development, but this is not extending towards Su-57 or S-400 sales. So, security cooperation, particularly in the counterinsurgency sphere and regional crises, are growing, but arms sales are not likely to grow, and those arms sales are not even likely to grow in Iran, where the arms embargo was recently lifted due to intense Russian pressure. In spite of their very negative US-Russia systemic relationship and confrontation, Russia and the United States can actually cooperate in the Gulf region on several spheres. The first would be the restoration of the JCPOA, where Russia was an indispensable stakeholder in 2015, so bringing Iran back to the nuclear talks. The second is on maritime security, in particular securing the waterways in the Red Sea, such as the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. In the short term, they might benefit from disruption of global oil supplies, but in the long term, they're also a guarantor of OPEC+. And they have a base in the Red Sea in Sudan that's forming, and an Indian Ocean presence. So the Russians want to ensure stability in that region, and that's something that aligns with the interests of Saudi Arabia and the United States. Thirdly, the Russians and the Americans could cooperate on ending the war in Yemen. The Biden administration and the Kremlin both want to end the Saudi-led military intervention in Yemen, and this vicious spiral of violence between the Saudis and the Houthis. The Russians have close relations with all of the major stakeholders in Yemen, including the Hadi government, the UAE-backed Sultan Transitional Council, a South Yemeni separatist movement which visits Moscow routinely, and, to a lesser extent, the Houthi rebels, which are aligned with Iran.